Okay. My name is Max Weaver, and this is my presentation on the Dutch Revolts, otherwise known as the 80 Years' War. So, through royal marriage, political arrangements, and the lack of nationhood in the 15th and 16th century, the Netherlands slowly came under control of the Spanish Empire. However, this wasn't working out well for a multitude of reasons in the 16th century. One reason was religion. So in 1555, Philip II took over from his father as sovereign leader of of Habsburg Netherlands, and he began to actively persecute Protestants for heresy. And this was not well received by the Dutch. And noblemen from the Netherlands put together a petition for the prosecution to stop, but this was denied by Philip. So, following some more minor rebellions, Philip instituted the Council of Troubles, which arrested 9,000 and executed 1,000. And some of these people even included high ranking members of Dutch society. People like William of Orange fled abroad to other countries to avoid prosecution. However, the king essentially doomed himself by imposing much higher taxes on the Netherlands to fund his expensive ongoing war against the Ottoman Empire. And this upset a lot of the people who were previously loyal to the Habsburg Empire because now they were facing economic strife because of the higher taxes. So the war truly began on April 1st, 1572, when the Sea Beggars captured the port of Brill. Other cities and towns in the Netherlands decided to defect to the Orange side. And by July, the only major cities still supporting Philip were Amsterdam and Schoonhoven, I believe is the way it's pronounced. Things ran in Philip's favor for a couple of years as his troops slowly started to reclaim the rebel land. However, by 1576, he had not paid his troops in over 2 years. And this caused this made a lot of his troops upset, and they began to disband or leave the army because they weren't being paid. So, over the next 4 years, all of southern Netherlands were recaptured by Philip, and other cities across the nation were also brought back under the control of the Habsburg Empire. The Dutch Republic's troops stayed unified in some parts of the country, but the Spanish outnumbered them by far. The Dutch seceded officially from the Spanish on the 22nd of July, 1581, but this didn't do much to change things except for in addition to the real war, it encouraged a propaganda war between both sides as well. So 1584 was a disaster for the Dutch, as Parma, the Spanish general, reclaimed all of Belgium and most of the southern Netherlands. And so this was obviously a huge loss for the Dutch. And it got so bad that Orange actually considered accepting the title Count of Holland and being done with the whole thing. But then he was assassinated, so essentially this idea was crushed, and this was a major blow for the Dutch troops because they were losing their major leader. So the States General decided to send an embassy to France, asking French King Henry if he would want to become the King of Netherlands as well. But things were not going well internally in France, and so he decided it would be best to not defy the Spanish king. So next, the Dutch they turned to Elizabeth I, the English queen, for help, and she agreed to make the Dutch Republic a protectorate of England and sent thousands of troops over there. And she specifically wanted them to be under the eye of Sir Robert Dudley, her favorite courtier. However, Dudley was facing like a lot of ridicule for his job and practices by other members or generals of the army. I guess other courtiers also maybe, and he returned to England because he was upset and discouraged at everybody ridiculing his job, and this was the last time that a mixed monarchy was attempted in the Netherlands. In 1609, the Spanish and the Dutch signed a treaty to negotiate a truce. This was a major victory for the Dutch, as the Spanish would leave them alone, and they were recognized by their greatest enemy as a legitimate country. But on the other hand, this was embarrassing for the Spanish because, they had been winning the war, and but they couldn't like risk driving their economy into the ground anymore because their economy was already struggling, and they figured it was worth damaging their reputation rather than their economy itself. And the truce was signed for 12 years. So for a while, it was going well. The Dutch and Spanish were avoiding each other, but as soon as the truce came to an end in 1619, the government in a stronger position when the truce ended in 2 years. However, um, the Dutch's chosen king and queen did not succeed in capturing the throne. Okay. Despite all this, the truce could have continued if it wasn't for a very unfortunate misunderstanding. So Maurice of Nassau, or I think a stadtholder, lied to Petrus Peccius, a negotiator from Brabant, and gave him the impression that Spain wanted to be willing to continue the truce if the Dutch Republic had agreed to Spanish sovereignty over the Netherlands. And Peccius then mentioned the proposal to the government in The Hague, and they were disgusted by the idea of giving up their sovereignty that they had fought many years to win. So war did not begin immediately, despite how insulted The Hague felt. Maurice continued his negotiations with Spain without any more like big failures like he had before. And also, the Spanish king died and was succeeded by Philip IV, I believe, who had to get settled on the throne before the war could actually begin. But I think everybody knew that the war was bound to start. And the reason for this was that the Dutch had benefited from the war, and the Spanish had, or they had economically benefited from the war, and the Spanish had economically struggled from the war. Spain did not want to like wage in on an all-out war with the Dutch Republic, so they tried to like make a few strategic captures on ports, on ports, and leave it like that. But the failed siege on Bergen op Zoom had to be lifted after a few months. So the Spanish switched to economic warfare, and they did so by attacking Dutch ships. So Dutch ships had to sail in convoys with naval support just to trade with other countries because the Spanish tried to continually attack the ships to cause economic strife um, in the Dutch nation. So the Spanish were also able to shut off Dutch international waterway connections to Germany, which caused the price of dairy to drop dramatically. However, in doing this, the Spanish also made trading harder for themselves as well. So the only people that really benefited from the trade war that was going on was other countries that remained neutral at the time. So talks ensued with Spain in 1632, which did not come to any useful conclusions, and Henry broke them off in 1633. So following victories in their war against Germany, the Spanish made inroads into southern Netherlands once again, and with any hope of peace with the Spanish fading, Henry made the decision to consider an alliance with France. In February 1635, France and the Netherlands signed a treaty to invade the southern Netherlands later that year, which would have been a very effective strategy, but it did not work as planned. The Spanish forces were strong enough to defeat the Dutch attack, and after the Dutch were defeated, the French also backed down. So during this attack, the Spanish besieged. Okay, so I'm not exactly sure where I got cut off because I'm on Flipgrid and you can only record it 10 minutes at a time, but I'm just going to try and resume where I think I left off. So after the capture of Schinkensens by the Spanish, the Dutch took it back themselves from the Spanish, which was an embarrassing defeat for them. But then the pro-peace party in the Dutch Republic gained popularity and decided to cut spending on the army. So this wasn't completely bad news for the Dutch Republic, as the lack of spending on the military budgets combined with the increased demand by the Germans for foodstuffs meant that they had freed up a bunch of money. So despite its lack of spending, the Dutch Republic was generally considered victorious at the end of the 1630s. The Spanish were left essentially under no illusions that the Dutch Navy was the most powerful in the world, and gradually the war came to a halt as the Spanish realized they could no longer afford the expense of constant conflict. In January 1906, negotiations on a peace treaty officially began. Um, as the larger piece of Munster. I'm sorry, and the treaty was relatively easy to draft as the text was pretty much copied from the 12 Years' Truce. By June 1648, the peace was official. So essentially, the Dutch gained sovereignty, but they didn't gain a whole lot. Obviously, as the war came to the end, they were able to free up a lot of money as the war was not as economically damaging to them as it was for the Spanish. And the Spanish certainly didn't win anything. They did. Uh, they lost the Dutch, and they were constantly facing economic hardship throughout the entirety of the war. But they were able to regain strength in the following decades to come. But there was not much gains on either side. I also wanted to add that this was an extremely embarrassing defeat for the Spanish since they were such a large and powerful nation that was essentially defeated by the Dutch. And so it had an extremely damaging impact on their reputation.